Olivia Bennet, 29, stared at her sister across the crowded engagement party, champagne glass shattering on the marble floor as Melissa's words hung in the air. "I'm pregnant, and guess who the father is?" The knowing smirk on her sister's face, the guilty pallor on her fiancé James' face, and the collective gasp from her family told Olivia everything before the actual confession. Her perfect life, carefully built over years, crumbled in seconds. She never imagined family betrayal would come from the two people she trusted most. Before I continue with what happened next in this family revenge drama, I'd love to know where you're watching from today. Drop your location in the comments below. If you enjoy real stories about family betrayal and justice served, hit that like button and subscribe to join our storytelling community. Trust me, you'll want to see how this family karma plays out when blood loyalty meets cold, calculated revenge. Olivia Bennet had always been the responsible one. Growing up in a middle-class neighborhood in Boston, she was the daughter who followed the rules, maintained a perfect GPA, and helped care for her younger sister Melissa after their mother died of cancer when Olivia was just 15. Their father, Robert Bennet, worked double shifts as a hospital administrator to provide for his daughters, often leaving Olivia to shoulder the responsibility of raising Melissa during those formative teenage years. "You're so good with her, Liv," her father would say, exhaustion etched into the lines of his face. "Your mother would be proud of how you've stepped up." Those words became Olivia's North Star. Every decision she made, from sacrificing her social life to staying local for college so she could continue helping at home, was guided by a sense of duty to her family. Meanwhile, Melissa bloomed into a stunning young woman, with their mother's captivating green eyes and natural charm. Where Olivia was studious and reserved, Melissa was vivacious and spontaneous. The sisters couldn't have been more different, yet Olivia felt fiercely protective of her younger sibling. After college, Olivia pursued a career in architectural design, quickly establishing herself at one of Boston's premier firms. Her colleagues respected her meticulous attention to detail and innovative approaches. By 27, she had secured a junior partner position, something almost unheard of for someone her age. Her career trajectory seemed unstoppable. Then came James Donovan. They met at a charity gala where Olivia's firm had donated design services for a new community center. James, a successful financial analyst with kind brown eyes and an easy laugh, approached her as she stood alone examining the venue's structural elements. Calculating how many support beams it would take to keep this place standing during a zombie apocalypse, he joked, handing her a glass of champagne. Olivia found herself charmed by his ability to see through her professional facade. Their conversation flowed effortlessly from architecture to finance to their shared love of historical documentaries. By the end of the evening, they had exchanged numbers, and within a week, they were having dinner at a small Italian restaurant overlooking the Boston Harbor. Their relationship progressed with the same careful precision that characterized Olivia's approach to life. They complemented each other perfectly. His spontaneity balanced her methodical nature, while her grounding presence tempered his occasional impulsivity. After 18 months together, James proposed during a weekend trip to a coastal Maine lighthouse that Olivia had always admired for its architectural significance. "I want to build something lasting with you," he said, down on one knee with the Atlantic Ocean crashing behind him. "Something as enduring as this lighthouse that's weathered centuries of storms." The diamond ring caught the late afternoon sunlight as Olivia said yes through tears of joy. Finally, it seemed the years of sacrifice and responsibility had led to her reward, a fulfilling career, and a partner who understood and supported her. When they announced their engagement, no one seemed more excited than Melissa. At 25, Olivia's sister had bounced between jobs and relationships, never quite finding her footing. She immediately volunteered to help plan the engagement party, insisting it be held at their father's house, the family home where they had grown up. "You've done so much for everyone else," Melissa said, hugging Olivia tightly. "Let me do this for you. You deserve to be celebrated." Touched by her sister's enthusiasm, Olivia agreed, never suspecting that beneath Melissa's supportive exterior lurked a current of jealousy that had been building since childhood. Never suspecting that while she worked late nights at the architecture firm, James and Melissa had been meeting for what they claimed were engagement party planning sessions. Never suspecting that the perfect life she had so carefully constructed was built on a foundation as fragile as a house of cards. Looking back, the signs were there, scattered like breadcrumbs along a treacherous path. I was just too trusting, too focused on wedding plans and deadlines at work to notice the subtle shifts in behavior from both my sister and my fiancé. It started 3 months before the engagement party. James began working later than usual, his phone perpetually on silent. When I'd reach for it to check the time or take a photo, he'd snatch it away with reflexes I never knew he possessed. "Client confidentiality," he'd explain with an easy smile that I now recognize as rehearsed. "You know how it is in finance." I did know how it was in my own profession, the need for discretion with clients, so I never pushed. Trust was the cornerstone of our relationship, or so I believed. Then there were the unexplained expenses on our joint credit card, dinner at restaurants we'd never visited together, a weekend charge at a hotel in Providence, just 2 hours from Boston. "Conference," James explained when I casually mentioned it. "Last-minute thing. The firm put it on my card by mistake. They are reimbursing me." I nodded, satisfied with the explanation. After all, I'd attended plenty of last-minute industry events myself. Melissa's behavior shifted too. My normally fashion-conscious sister started wearing oversized sweaters despite the spring warmth. She cancelled our traditional Sunday brunches 3 weeks in a row, citing stomach bugs and migraines. When we did meet, she'd ask probing questions about my relationship with James. "Are you guys having any problems? It's normal, you know. Engagement jitters and all that," she'd say, stirring her coffee with unusual intensity. "We're great," I'd reply, confused by her sudden interest in potential cracks in my relationship. "Planning a wedding is stressful, but we're solid." A shadow would cross her face at my positive response, so brief I convinced myself I'd imagined it. The most glaring sign came during a dinner at my father's house 6 weeks before the engagement party. Dad had stepped out to answer a work call, leaving the 3 of us, James, Melissa, and me, alone at the table. I excused myself to use the bathroom, returning quietly through the dining room door. They didn't hear me enter. James was leaning close to Melissa, their heads nearly touching. "We need to talk about this," he whispered urgently. "Things are getting complicated." "There's nothing to talk about," Melissa replied, her voice equally low but sharp with emotion. "What's done is done." They sprang apart when I cleared my throat. The moment hung between us, tense and heavy with unspoken words. "Everything okay?" I asked, searching their faces. "Just wedding talk," Melissa said brightly, too brightly. James was asking about my maid of honor speech. James nodded emphatically, reaching for his wine glass with slightly trembling fingers. "Your sister has some interesting stories about you." I laughed it off, chalking up their strange behavior to the stress of wedding planning. Perhaps James was nervous about Melissa sharing embarrassing childhood stories. Perhaps Melissa was emotional about her big sister getting married. There were other moments too, finding them whispering in the kitchen at a family barbecue, James volunteering to pick Melissa up from a bar when her car wouldn't start instead of calling a rideshare, Melissa's unusual interest in our honeymoon plans and wedding night details. The day before the engagement party, I stopped by Melissa's apartment unexpectedly, hoping to surprise her with lunch as a thank you for planning the celebration. I used the spare key she'd given me years ago, calling out as I entered. The apartment was empty, but evidence of a hasty departure lingered: 2 wine glasses on the coffee table, a men's jacket I didn't recognize draped over a chair, and a credit card receipt for takeout from the previous night showing 2 entries. My sister had been seeing someone she hadn't mentioned. I felt a brief sting that she hadn't confided in me about this new relationship, but quickly reasoned that perhaps she wanted to be sure it was serious before making introductions. That night, James came home late again, smelling of unfamiliar cologne and claiming he'd been out with colleagues for drinks. He showered immediately, something he never usually did before bed. "Just want to wash the bar smell off," he explained, not quite meeting my eyes. As I lay in bed that night listening to the shower run, all these puzzle pieces floated in my mind, refusing to connect into a coherent picture. Or perhaps I was refusing to see the image they formed. Either way, I fell asleep that night still blissfully ignorant of the betrayal brewing beneath the surface of my perfect life. The final piece wouldn't click into place until 24 hours later, when my sister stood in our father's living room, one hand on her slightly rounded belly, and shattered my world with 7 devastating words: "James is the father of my baby." The engagement party had started perfectly. Dad's house gleamed with fairy lights that Melissa had meticulously strung around the backyard. Tables adorned with white roses and silver accents dotted the lawn, and a string quartet played softly in the corner. Friends, family, and colleagues mingled under the early evening sky, champagne glasses clinking as they celebrated our engagement. I wore a cream-colored cocktail dress that James had said brought out the gold flecks in my brown eyes. He stood beside me in a navy suit, his hand resting possessively on the small of my back, as we greeted guests. To anyone watching, we were the picture of a happy couple on the brink of a beautiful life together. "You've outdone yourself," I whispered to Melissa when she approached us, stunning in an emerald dress that complemented her eyes. "Everything is perfect." She smiled tightly, avoiding James' gaze. "You deserve it, sis." Dad called for everyone's attention around 8 o'clock, raising his glass for a toast. His eyes glistened with unshed tears as he spoke about Mom, how proud she would have been of the woman I'd become, and how happy she would be to see me find love with James. "To Olivia and James," he concluded, "may your foundation be strong and your love enduring." The guests echoed his toast, and James leaned down to kiss me softly. In that moment, despite the nagging doubts of the previous weeks, I felt completely, utterly happy. Then Melissa stepped forward, glass in hand. As maid of honor, it wasn't unusual for her to offer her own toast. But something in her expression, a mixture of determination and what I now recognize as guilt, sent a chill through me. "I'd like to say something too," she announced, her voice carrying across the suddenly quiet yard. James stiffened beside me, his hand dropping from my waist. "Olivia has always been the perfect one," Melissa began, her words slightly slurred. Had she been drinking heavily? I hadn't noticed. Perfect grades, perfect career, perfect fiancé. She laughed, but there was no humor in the sound. "Always cleaning up my messes, always being the responsible one." Dad stepped forward, concern etched on his face. "Melissa, perhaps now isn't." "No, Dad," she cut him off. "I need to say this." She turned back to the crowd, swaying slightly. "My sister deserves honesty. She deserves to know the truth before she walks down the aisle." The atmosphere shifted perceptibly, guests exchanging uncomfortable glances. James took a half step away from me, and in that small movement, I felt the first real tremor of foreboding. "Melissa, James said, his voice low and warning. Don't do this. She ignored him, her eyes locked on mine. I'm pregnant, Olivia. The revelation hung in the air. For a split second, I felt only confusion. Why would my sister choose this moment to announce her pregnancy? Was this the relationship she'd been hiding? Then she delivered the blow that would shatter my world. James is the father. The glass slipped from my fingers, shattering on the patio stones. The sound seemed to echo in the sudden, terrible silence. We didn't mean for it to happen, Melissa continued, tears streaming down her face. It just did. We've been seeing each other for months. Since before the proposal. I turned to James, desperately searching his face for denial, for outrage, for any indication that my sister was lying. Instead, I found only guilt and resignation. Is it true? I whispered. He couldn't meet my eyes. Liv, I'm so sorry. I wanted to tell you, but. But what? My voice sounded strange to my own ears, calm despite the hurricane of emotions raging inside me. But you thought you'd marry me anyway. Keep seeing my sister on the side. Raise her child as what, your niece or nephew? Melissa stepped closer, reaching for my arm. It wasn't supposed to happen like this. I was going to tell you privately, but then I saw you both looking so perfect, and everyone congratulating you, and I jerked away from her touch. Don't you dare try to justify this. She wiped at her tears, her expression shifting. The mask of regret slipped, revealing something uglier beneath. Pride. Triumph, even. Sorry, she said with a slight shrug and the ghost of a smirk. Guess he wasn't as committed as you thought. Maybe if you weren't so busy with your perfect career. The collective gasp from our guests told me I wasn't the only one who caught the lack of genuine remorse in her tone. My father moved to stand beside me, his face ashen with shock and anger. Both of you, he said to James and Melissa, his voice shaking, get out of my house. Now? James reached for me one last time. Olivia, please. Let me explain. There's nothing to explain, I said, finding strength in the cold rage crystallizing within me. You've been sleeping with my sister. She's pregnant with your child. What else matters? As they were escorted out by my father's oldest friend, my godfather, who had known us since we were children, Melissa turned back once more. This is for the best, Liv, she called, that same smirk playing at her lips. You'll see. Standing amid the wreckage of my engagement party, guests murmuring in scandalized clusters, my father trying to salvage some dignity from the situation, I made a silent promise to myself. This betrayal would not break me. Somehow, someday, justice would be served. I just didn't know yet how devastating that justice would be. The weeks following the engagement party passed in a blur of pain and rage. I took a leave of absence from work, unable to focus on architectural designs when my personal life had collapsed so spectacularly. Most days, I couldn't even get out of bed, lying awake staring at the ceiling of the guest room in my father's house, where I'd temporarily moved after refusing to return to the apartment James and I had shared. The worst part wasn't the betrayal itself, though that cut deep enough. It was the humiliation. Everyone knew. Colleagues sent awkward emails expressing condolences, as if someone had died. Friends walked on eggshells around me, their pity more unbearable than their silence. Even strangers seemed to whisper as I passed, though I knew that was just paranoia taking root. My father tried his best, bringing me tea and sitting quietly beside me when words failed him. You're stronger than this, Livy, he'd say, using my childhood nickname. You've always been the strong one. That was part of the problem. I had always been the strong one, the responsible one, the one who held everything together while Melissa got away with anything and everything. And where had it gotten me? 2 weeks after the engagement party, I found myself driving past Melissa's apartment. I hadn't planned to go there, had actively avoided that part of the city, in fact. But something pulled me toward that street, that building. A need to see, to confirm, to witness with my own eyes what I still couldn't fully process in my heart. James' car was parked outside. I sat in my car for nearly an hour, engine off, watching the windows of her third-floor apartment. Eventually, I saw them, silhouettes moving behind the curtains, standing close, embracing. My sister and my ex-fiancé, playing house with their unborn child while my life lay in ruins. Something broke inside me that night. The last threads of the person I had been, trusting, responsible Olivia, who believed in family loyalty above all else, snapped. In their place grew something harder, colder, and infinitely more dangerous. A need for retribution that consumed my every waking thought. I started planning the next day. First, I needed information. How long had their affair really been going on? Who else knew? Had they laughed about deceiving me behind my back? I created a fake social media profile and began connecting with mutual friends, distant relatives, colleagues of both James and Melissa. I scoured their public posts for clues, looking for photos where they might appear together at events I hadn't attended. The evidence trickled in slowly. A group photo from 6 months ago, at a bar opening, James and Melissa standing suspiciously close while I was out of town for a conference. A check-in at a restaurant 2 hours outside Boston, on a weekend, when James claimed to be on a fishing trip with college buddies. Comments on each other's posts that seemed innocent on the surface, but carried undertones that made my stomach clench with retrospective jealousy. Then came the bombshell. A message from Caitlin, a former college classmate of Melissa's, who had no idea she was talking to me. So crazy about your sister and James. But honestly, not surprised. They were always flirting at those game nights when Olivia was working late. Thought they might have hooked up once or twice, but never expected a baby. Your poor sister must be devastated. Game nights. Every Thursday for the past year, when I worked late finishing project proposals, Melissa had been hosting game nights that often included James. He'd mentioned them casually, just hanging with your sister and some friends, playing cards against humanity, and I'd been grateful that they got along so well. The deception ran deeper than I'd imagined. This wasn't a momentary lapse in judgment, or a drunken mistake. This was a calculated, ongoing betrayal by the two people I trusted most. My rage crystallized into something cold and purposeful. I returned to work with a focus that surprised my colleagues. You seem better, my assistant commented hesitantly. I wasn't better. I was transforming. By day, I threw myself into my architectural projects with a new intensity that earned me praise from senior partners. By night, I researched and plotted. I learned things about finance that I never cared to know before, vulnerabilities in James' investment strategies, clients he'd been less than ethical with, regulatory corners he'd cut. I discovered patterns in Melissa's life too, the job she was about to be offered at a prestigious marketing firm, the lease she was preparing to sign on a new, more expensive apartment, the prenatal care she'd arranged at an exclusive private practice. All pieces on a chessboard I was learning to manipulate. I also learned about myself, capacities for darkness I never knew I possessed. The cold satisfaction I felt when imagining their downfall disturbed me in quiet moments, but those moments grew rarer as my plan took shape. 3 months after the engagement party disaster, I was ready to make my first move. James had left several personal items at our shared apartment, items I'd boxed up, but never returned. Among them was his backup laptop, password protected but no match for the IT specialist I hired for an exorbitant fee, paid in cash. The contents of that laptop gave me everything I needed to set the dominoes falling. Emails detailing questionable financial advice he'd given to clients. Evidence of a pattern of workplace sexual harassment complaints that had been quietly settled. And most damning of all, communications with Melissa dating back 14 months, long before our engagement, that left no doubt about the extent and duration of their betrayal. "We shouldn't be doing this," Melissa had written in one email. "Olivia would be crushed. What she doesn't know won't hurt her," James had replied. "Besides, you're more fun. She's too serious, too focused on her career. You know how to live." The words burned into my brain, fueling my resolve. They had chosen each other over me, justifying their betrayal with petty criticisms of my character. Now they would face the consequences of that choice. I waited until a weekend, when I knew they were attending a prenatal appointment together. Then I made anonymous calls to James' firm's compliance department and the Financial Regulatory Board, directing them to evidence of his ethical violations. I forwarded select emails to the HR director at Melissa's prospective new employer, emails where she had disparaged the very company she now sought to join. I contacted the leasing agent for her dream apartment, posing as a concerned previous landlord with tales of property damage and late payments. Small dominoes, but they would fall in sequence, building momentum for the larger collapse to come. I know what you're thinking as you watch this unfold. How could someone so betrayed find the strength to execute such a calculated plan? Have you ever been pushed to your breaking point by family betrayal? Drop a comment below if you've ever had to choose between forgiveness and justice. If this revenge story resonates with you, hit that like button and subscribe to hear more stories of family karma and betrayal. The next part of my journey gets even more intense, and you won't want to miss what happens when my sister and ex-fiancé begin to realize who's really pulling the strings. The first sign that my plan was working came 3 weeks later. My father called, his voice tight with concern. "Have you spoken to your sister recently?" he asked. "You know I haven't," I replied, keeping my tone neutral. "Not since the engagement party." He sighed heavily. "She lost that job offer she was so excited about. Apparently, they went in another direction at the last minute. She's pretty torn up about it." I murmured appropriate sympathies while a cold satisfaction bloomed in my chest. The first domino had fallen. "And that apartment she wanted fell through too," Dad continued. "The timing couldn't be worse with the baby coming. She and James are still crammed into her one-bedroom." "How unfortunate," I said, careful to keep any hint of pleasure from my voice. "How is James handling it all?" My father hesitated. "That's the other thing. There's some kind of investigation happening at his firm. He's been placed on administrative leave pending the outcome. Something about client complaints. Life has a way of catching up with people, doesn't it?" I said softly. "Olivia," my father said, a note of suspicion creeping into his voice. "You wouldn't know anything about this, would you?" "Me? I've been focused on rebuilding my life, Dad. I barely have energy for my own problems, let alone creating new ones for them." The lie came easily, wrapped in just enough truth to be convincing. I had been rebuilding my life, just not in the way anyone suspected. After ending the call with my father, I drove to a coffee shop across town, one I'd never frequented before. There, I opened my laptop and logged into an anonymous email account. It was time for Phase 2. I had been monitoring Melissa's pregnancy through mutual acquaintances and social media. She was nearly 5 months along now, past the point of highest risk, entering what should have been the most joyful period of expectancy. The perfect time to introduce new stresses. First, I sent a carefully crafted email to the head of HR at James' firm, detailing additional ethical violations I'd discovered on his laptop. I attached documentation that, while not definitively proving wrongdoing, raised enough red flags to warrant extending their investigation. Next, I contacted 3 of James' biggest clients, people whose contact information I'd memorized during our relationship, expressing concerns about their investments based on rumors I'd overheard at industry events. Nothing libelous, nothing that could be traced back to me, just enough to plant seeds of doubt. Finally, I reached out to Melissa's landlord. This required more finesse, as I needed to remain anonymous. I created a fake email address posing as a concerned neighbor, complaining about late-night noise and possible unauthorized residents, specifically mentioning that a man seemed to be living in what was legally a single-occupancy unit. I knew from experience that her building management was strict about lease violations. With these digital breadcrumbs scattered, I waited for the next dominoes to fall. I didn't have to wait long. Within days, James called me, the first direct contact since the engagement party. I let it go to voicemail, listening with grim satisfaction, as his usually confident voice cracked with stress. "Olivia, it's me. I know I'm the last person you want to hear from, but things are falling apart here. I'm on unpaid leave pending an investigation, clients are jumping ship, and we are having trouble making ends meet. I know what we did was unforgivable, but I can't shake the feeling that someone is deliberately trying to ruin us. If you know anything about this, please, for the sake of what we once had, call me back." I deleted the message without returning the call. 2 days later, I arranged to meet my father for lunch at a restaurant near his office. I needed to gauge how much he suspected, to ensure my involvement remained hidden. "You're looking well," he said as I sat down across from him. There was truth in his observation. I had lost the haunted look that had plagued me in the immediate aftermath of the betrayal. My skin glowed with purpose, my eyes bright with secret knowledge. "I'm feeling better," I replied. "Work has been a good distraction. How are you holding up?" He ran a hand through his graying hair. "Caught in the middle, to be honest. Melissa calls crying almost daily. Their situation is getting dire." "Oh?" I kept my expression neutral, interested, but not overly so. "James is now officially under investigation for securities fraud. Something about misleading clients about investment risks. And Melissa received an eviction notice. Apparently, her lease doesn't allow for additional permanent residents." I took a sip of water to hide the smile threatening to emerge. "That's terrible timing with the baby coming. Where will they go?" My father looked uncomfortable. "That's partly why I wanted to see you. They've asked to move into the house temporarily. Into your old room, actually." The irony was almost too perfect. The betrayers, seeking shelter in my childhood bedroom. I fought to keep my expression appropriately somber. "You're an adult, Dad. It's your house. You don't need my permission." "I know, but I wanted to be sensitive to your feelings. You're still staying in the guest room occasionally. I wouldn't want to create an awkward situation." I reached across the table to squeeze his hand reassuringly. "Don't worry about me. I'm moving forward with my life. I've actually been looking at apartments. It's time I stood on my own again." Relief flooded his features. "That's my girl. Always the strong one." If only he knew the true nature of that strength, how it had hardened into something sharp-edged and dangerous. As we finished lunch, my phone buzzed with a text. It was from an unknown number, but I immediately recognized Melissa's writing style. "I know you're behind this. It won't work. James and I are stronger than whatever vendetta you're pursuing. The baby deserves better than an aunt who would try to destroy its parents out of jealousy." I showed no reaction as I tucked my phone away. Melissa's accusation was a desperate shot in the dark. She had no proof, just suspicion born of guilty conscience. But her text confirmed something valuable: they were beginning to crumble under pressure. The facade of their perfect new life was showing cracks. That night, alone in my new apartment, a sleek, minimalist space in a secure building where neither James nor Melissa knew I lived, I opened a bottle of expensive champagne. Not to celebrate, exactly, but to commemorate a milestone. Phase 2 was complete. Their financial security was compromised, their housing situation destabilized, their confidence shaken. Now it was time for Phase 3, the destruction of their relationship itself. Because here was the truth I had discovered during my investigation: James and Melissa's relationship wasn't built on love. It was founded on mutual selfishness, physical attraction, and the thrill of forbidden connection. James had cheated on previous girlfriends before me. Melissa had a history of pursuing unavailable men. Neither was capable of the loyalty necessary for raising a child together, especially under mounting external pressures. I set down my champagne glass and opened my laptop. There, in folders meticulously organized by date and category, was all the evidence I needed to drive the final wedge between them. James' flirtatious emails with a co-worker, sent during the same period he was seeing Melissa. Melissa's text exchanges with an ex-boyfriend, lamenting her complicated situation, and suggesting she wasn't fully committed to James. All I needed to do was ensure each of them saw the other's indiscretions. As I drafted the anonymous emails that would deliver these revelations, a small voice in the back of my mind questioned whether I was going too far. This vendetta had consumed months of my life. Was it healing me or transforming me into someone I wouldn't recognize? I silenced the doubt with a simple reminder: they had chosen this path when they betrayed me. I was merely ensuring they experienced the full consequences of that choice. Tomorrow, the next phase would begin. And soon after, they would understand the true meaning of justice. Watching a relationship disintegrate is like observing a building collapse from the inside. First the support beams buckle, then the walls begin to crack, and finally, the entire structure comes crashing down. I had weakened James and Melissa's foundation with financial and housing insecurity. Now it was time to target the emotional structures keeping them together. My father provided regular updates, without realizing he was feeding intelligence to the architect of their destruction. James and Melissa had indeed moved into my childhood home, cramming their belongings into my old bedroom, while they figured out their next steps. James was interviewing for positions at smaller, less prestigious firms, the only places that would consider him, with an ongoing investigation hanging over his head. Melissa was taking freelance marketing jobs, bringing in barely enough to cover her share of expenses. "They argue constantly," Dad confided during one of our weekly dinners. "Usually when they think I can't hear. About money, about the investigation, about the baby's future. I'm worried about Melissa's stress levels affecting the pregnancy." I nodded sympathetically while internally noting these stress points to exploit. "That's concerning. Stress isn't good for the baby. The doctor already warned her about her blood pressure," Dad said, pushing food around his plate. "I'm caught in the middle, Livy. I want to support her, she's still my daughter and that's still my grandchild, but what they did to you was unforgivable." I reached across the table to squeeze his hand. "You're doing the right thing, Dad. Family supports family, even when it's difficult." The irony of my statement wasn't lost on me, but my father accepted it at face value. That night, I executed the next phase of my plan. Using the evidence I'd gathered from James' laptop, I created a fake email account in the name of Kelly Sanders, a junior analyst at James' firm, who had always been a little too friendly with him at office parties. I crafted an email expressing concern about his situation, sympathy for his predicament, and just a hint of lingering attraction. I included details only someone who worked closely with him would know, making the deception believable. I sent it at 11:23 p.m., late enough that Melissa might see the notification pop up on his phone if they were in bed together. 3 days later, I created a social media profile for Thomas Reed, supposedly an old college flame of Melissa's. I used this profile to send her a message reminiscing about their time together and suggesting they reconnect, especially now that you seem to be going through a rough patch. These small disruptions were designed to plant seeds of doubt, to make each of them question the other's loyalty. But the true killing blow came from an unexpected source. Lauren Chen, a former colleague of mine who had never particularly liked Melissa, reached out to me 6 weeks into their cohabitation at my father's house. "I thought you should know," her message began, "I saw James at Vertex Bar last night with a woman who definitely wasn't your sister. They looked intimate." I feigned shock and concern, asking for details while my mind raced with the possibilities this development offered. Lauren described the woman, petite, blonde, professional-looking, and the body language that suggested more than a friendly drink between colleagues. "I took a photo," Lauren added, attaching an image that clearly showed James with his arm around a woman at a dimly lit bar, his lips close to her ear. This was better than anything I could have engineered myself. A genuine indiscretion, documented with photographic evidence. The perfect ammunition. I thanked Lauren profusely, promising to keep the information confidential. Then I created yet another anonymous email account, and sent the photo to Melissa with a simple message: "Thought you should know what your baby daddy does when he's working late. Take care of yourself and your baby." The response was nuclear. My father called me the next morning, his voice strained with exhaustion. "Olivia, I don't know what happened, but World War III broke out here last night. Melissa got some message on her phone and completely lost it. She and James were screaming at each other for hours. He stormed out around midnight and hasn't come back." "That sounds awful," I said, infusing my voice with appropriate concern. "Is Melissa okay? The baby?" "She's locked herself in the bedroom. Won't come out, won't talk to me. I'm worried about her condition." "I'll come over," I offered, knowing this was my chance to witness the destruction firsthand. "Maybe she'll talk to me." There was a long pause on the line. "Are you sure? After everything?" "She's still my sister, Dad. And that's still my niece or nephew. I can set aside my feelings for their well-being." 2 hours later, I stood in my father's living room, the site of my humiliation months earlier. The house bore physical evidence of the argument: a broken vase, cushions strewn across the floor, a dent in the wall where something had been thrown. My father looked years older, lines of stress etched deeply around his eyes. "She still won't come out," he said, gesturing helplessly toward the closed bedroom door. "Maybe you'll have better luck." I approached the door, knocking softly. "Melissa? It's Olivia. Can we talk?" Silence, then the sound of movement. The door cracked open to reveal my sister's tear-stained face, her eyes puffy and red, her hair a tangled mess. Her pregnant belly protruded prominently beneath her oversized t-shirt. She stared at me with a mixture of surprise and suspicion. "Why are you here?" she croaked. "Dad called. He's worried about you." "About the baby?" She laughed bitterly. "Now you care about the baby? After everything you've done?" I kept my expression neutral. I don't know what you mean. Don't play innocent, she hissed, opening the door wider. The job, the apartment, the investigation, it was all you, wasn't it? And now this. She thrust her phone at me, displaying the photo of James with the other woman. Did you take this yourself, or do you have people following him? I examined the photo with practiced surprise. I've never seen this before. James is cheating on you. Her face crumpled, rage giving way to devastation. Like he cheated on you with me, she whispered. I should have known. Once a cheater. For a moment, just a moment, I felt a flicker of sympathy for my sister. She looked so broken, so vulnerable. Then I remembered her smirk at my engagement party, the casual cruelty with which she'd destroyed my happiness, and the sympathy evaporated. What are you going to do? I asked. She sank onto the bed, one hand resting protectively on her belly. I don't know. We are already barely hanging on financially. The baby comes in 3 months. I can't do this alone. I sat beside her, maintaining careful physical distance. You're not alone. You have Dad. And? I hesitated, the words feeling strange on my tongue. You have me. She looked up sharply, searching my face for signs of deception. Why would you help me after what I did? Because I'm not you, I said simply. I don't betray family. The statement hung between us, heavy with implication. Melissa flinched as though I'd slapped her. He said you'd never find out, she whispered. That we could break it off before the wedding. But then I got pregnant, and everything spiraled. I never meant to hurt you at the engagement party. I just snapped when I saw everyone celebrating you. Again. Again? I echoed. It's always been about you, Olivia. Perfect Olivia, who got the grades and the career and Dad's approval. Do you know what it's like living in your shadow? Always being compared and found wanting. I stared at her, genuinely surprised by this revelation. I never knew you felt that way. How could you? You were too busy being perfect. She wiped angrily at fresh tears. And now look at me. Pregnant, abandoned, broke. While you're probably thriving. The irony was almost painful. I had spent months orchestrating their downfall, neglecting my own healing in the process. Was I thriving? Or had I simply exchanged one obsession for another? Before I could respond, my father knocked gently on the open door. James is here, he said, his expression grim. He wants to talk to Melissa. I stood, moving toward the door. I should go. Melissa grabbed my wrist, her grip surprisingly strong. Stay. Please. I looked down at her hand, then at her face, vulnerable, pleading. For a moment, I saw my little sister again, the girl who'd crawled into my bed during thunderstorms, seeking comfort. Okay, I said. I'll stay. The confrontation that followed was every bit as explosive as I'd hoped. James entered the bedroom with excuses ready. The woman was just a colleague. They were discussing job opportunities. Nothing happened, but his defense crumbled when Melissa produced not only the photo, but text messages she'd found on his phone while he was showering that morning. You've been texting her for weeks, she screamed, her face flushed dangerously. Planning meetings, telling her how much you miss her. You went through my phone. James shot back, deflecting. What happened to trust? Trust? Melissa laughed hysterically. You want to talk about trust after what we did to Olivia? After what you're doing to me? James finally noticed me standing silently in the corner. His eyes widened with shock, then narrowed with dawning comprehension. You, he said. You're behind all of this, aren't you? The investigation, the clients leaving, and now this. I met his gaze calmly. I have no idea what you're talking about, James. I'm just here to support my sister. Bullshit, he spat. This is too perfect, too calculated. You're getting revenge. My father stepped between us, his patience clearly exhausted. Enough. James, either talk to Melissa civilly or leave my house. I won't have this kind of stress around my pregnant daughter. James struggled visibly to compose himself, running a hand through his disheveled hair. Fine. Melissa, can we talk privately? Anything you have to say, you can say in front of my family, she replied coldly. The conversation that followed revealed the full extent of their relationship's deterioration. Financial pressures had created resentment. The pregnancy had accelerated a commitment neither was fully ready for. And underneath it all was the knowledge that their relationship was built on betrayal, a foundation too unstable to support the weight of genuine hardship. I can't do this anymore, James finally said, defeat evident in his voice. Us, the baby, the investigation, all of it. I need some time to figure things out. Time? Melissa's voice rose dangerously. The baby comes in 3 months, James. I know, and I'll support you financially. What little I can, anyway. But this relationship, it's not working. Maybe it never did. The words hung in the air, a final judgment on their ill-fated union. Melissa stared at him, one hand protectively covering her belly, tears streaming silently down her face. Get out, she whispered. James looked from Melissa to me, a flash of bitter understanding crossing his features. She won, didn't she? You don't even realize it, but Olivia got exactly what she wanted. All of this, he gestured around the room, is her revenge. Without waiting for a response, he turned and walked out. The front door slammed moments later, the sound echoing with a finality that signaled the end of yet another chapter. My father followed him, presumably to ensure he actually left. Melissa and I remained in the bedroom, silence stretching between us. Is it true? She finally asked, her voice small. Did you orchestrate all of this? I considered my answer carefully. The revenge had been sweet, exactly as I'd planned. Yet standing here, witnessing the wreckage up close, I felt strangely hollow. What would you do, I asked instead, if someone destroyed everything you'd built? If the two people you trusted most betrayed you in the worst possible way? She looked away, unable to meet my eyes. I never thought about it like that. About how it would feel for you. No, I said softly. You didn't. In that moment, seeing my sister broken and alone, I made a decision that surprised even me. The next phase of my plan had involved ensuring that neither of them ever found happiness or stability again. I had evidence to provide to family court that would limit James' custody rights. I had connections who could ensure Melissa's freelance work dried up completely. But looking at her now, I realized a fundamental truth: continuing my vendetta wouldn't heal me. It would only ensure that I remained as trapped in bitterness as they were in the consequences of their actions. What happens now? Melissa asked, unconsciously echoing my thoughts. I took a deep breath. Now we figure out how to move forward. All of us. For the baby's sake. She looked up at me, genuine surprise in her tear-stained eyes. After everything we did to you, you'd help us. Not him, I clarified. But you're my sister. And that baby is my niece or nephew. Family is family, even when it's complicated. As the words left my mouth, I realized I meant them. Not as part of some elaborate revenge scheme, but as a genuine step toward healing, for all of us. The path forward wouldn't be easy. Trust, once shattered, is nearly impossible to fully restore. But standing in that bedroom with my sister, I glimpsed a future beyond revenge. A future where the child growing inside her wouldn't bear the full weight of its parents' mistakes. And perhaps most surprisingly, a future where I might finally be free of the all-consuming anger that had driven me for so long. 6 months later, on a crisp autumn morning, I stood in the hospital nursery, looking down at my newborn niece. Emma Grace Bennett had arrived 3 weeks early, tiny but healthy, with a shock of dark hair, and the same green eyes as her mother and grandmother. "She's perfect," I whispered, watching her tiny chest rise and fall with each breath. Beside me, Melissa smiled tiredly. The delivery had been difficult, 20 hours of labor ending in an emergency C-section, but both mother and daughter had pulled through. "Do you want to hold her?" she asked, surprising me. I hesitated, then carefully gathered the swaddled bundle into my arms. Emma squirmed slightly before settling against my chest, her warmth spreading through me like sunshine after a long winter. The journey to this moment had been anything but straightforward. After James walked out that day, he followed through on his promise to provide financial support, meager though it was given his diminished circumstances. The investigation at his firm had concluded with sanctions, but no criminal charges, allowing him to secure a position at a small investment company in Chicago. He moved 3 weeks later, maintaining contact with Melissa primarily through terse emails about medical appointments and financial arrangements. Melissa remained in our father's house, transforming my childhood bedroom into a nursery with second-hand furniture and hand-painted decorations. I helped, spending weekends selecting safe paint colors and assembling the crib. Our relationship remained fragile, marked by long silences and careful conversations, but it was healing, slowly, imperfectly, but genuinely. The most surprising development had been my own journey. After that confrontation, I systematically dismantled the infrastructure of my revenge. I deleted the anonymous email accounts, destroyed the evidence I'd gathered, and channeled my energy into rebuilding my own life rather than destroying theirs. I threw myself into work with healthy rather than obsessive focus, earning a promotion to senior partner. I reconnected with friends I'd neglected during my months of plotting. I even started dating again, cautiously, tentatively, but with genuine openness to the possibility of trust. And now, holding Emma, I felt the last pieces of bitterness dissolving, replaced by something I hadn't expected: hope. "She has Mom's eyes," Melissa said softly, watching us from her hospital bed. "She does," I agreed. "She's going to be fierce. Like her aunt." Melissa reached for my free hand, squeezing gently. "Olivia, I never properly apologized." "Not really. What James and I did." I shook my head, cutting her off. "We don't need to revisit that today. This is Emma's day." "No, I need to say this." Melissa's voice grew stronger. "What we did was unforgivable. The way we hurt you, the way I announced it at your engagement party. I've had a lot of time to think about why I did it. The jealousy, the resentment I'd built up over years. It doesn't excuse anything, but I want you to know I understand now what I destroyed. And I'm truly, deeply sorry." I looked down at Emma, her tiny face peaceful in sleep, unaware of the complicated history surrounding her birth. "I won't lie and say it didn't break me," I replied carefully. "For months, all I could think about was making you both suffer the way I had suffered." Melissa nodded, unsurprised. "I know. James was right that day, wasn't he? You were behind everything falling apart for us." I met her gaze directly. "Yes." She nodded slowly, processing this confirmation of what she'd long suspected. I would have done the same in your position. Maybe worse. But revenge didn't fix anything, I continued. It didn't heal me. It just kept me tied to the pain, reliving it every day. When did you stop? She asked. The revenge plotting. The day James left. Seeing you both so broken, I realized I was breaking myself too. That continuing down that path would keep me forever connected to the worst moment of my life. I glanced down at Emma. And I wanted to be better for her. She deserves at least one stable adult in her life who isn't consumed by past hurts. Tears welled in Melissa's eyes. I don't deserve your forgiveness. Maybe not, I acknowledged. But Emma deserves a mother and an aunt who aren't at war. And I deserve peace. Holding on to anger was like drinking poison and expecting you to die. A knock at the door interrupted our conversation. Our father entered, carrying a vase of pink roses. His face had regained some of its former vitality in recent months, the burden of family strife gradually lifting. How are my girls? He asked, setting the flowers on the bedside table. His gaze softened as he saw me holding Emma. All 4 of my girls. We're good, Dad, Melissa answered, wiping away tears. Really good. He looked between us, sensing the weight of the conversation he'd interrupted. Should I come back later? No, I said, carefully transferring Emma back to Melissa's arms. We were just talking about fresh starts. As our father pulled up a chair, engaging Melissa in conversation about Emma's feeding schedule, I moved to the window, gazing out at the hospital garden below. The trees were shedding their leaves, preparing for winter's rest before spring's renewal. The metaphor wasn't lost on me. James called that evening to check on Emma. Melissa put him on speaker, allowing him to coo awkwardly at his daughter from 500 miles away. When she mentioned I was in the room, there was a long pause before he said, "Congratulations, Aunt Olivia." The lack of hostility in his voice surprised me. Perhaps he, too, had found some measure of peace in the months since our confrontation. As the days passed and Melissa and Emma settled into a routine at home, I found myself spending more time with them than I'd anticipated. Emma's innocent presence acted as a bridge between her mother and me, allowing us to build something new from the ashes of our former relationship. One evening, as I helped Melissa bathe Emma, my sister looked up at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. Do you ever think about what would have happened if I hadn't announced the pregnancy at your engagement party? She asked. If James and I had just quietly broken things off, and you had married him not knowing? I considered the question, watching Emma splash her tiny hands in the warm water. I used to. I imagined myself married to a man who could betray me so completely, building a life on lies. Having children with him. I shook my head. As painful as that night was, it saved me from something worse. A life of ignorance, Melissa said softly. A life with someone who didn't truly love or respect me, I corrected. The truth hurt, it nearly destroyed me, but living a lie would have been worse. Melissa nodded slowly. I never thought I'd say this, but I'm glad James left. Not because of Emma, I'll never regret her, but because I can see now what kind of man he really was. What kind of relationship we really had. Built on betrayal, I murmured. Destined to fail, she agreed. Karma, I guess. Or just the natural consequence of choices made without considering their full impact. Later that night, driving home to my apartment, I reflected on how differently everything had turned out from what I had planned. My elaborate revenge had succeeded beyond my expectations, systematically dismantling James and Melissa's relationship and prospects. Yet the victory had been hollow until I chose a different path, not forgiveness exactly, but release. freedom from the need to punish. In the end, the most surprising twist wasn't what I did to them, but what I chose not to do. The revenge I abandoned. The peace I found instead. Emma is 6 months old now, growing and thriving despite the complicated circumstances of her birth. James visits monthly, maintaining a cordial if distant relationship with his daughter. Melissa has found work she can do from home, building a modest but stable life for herself and Emma. Our father delights in his role as doting grandfather. And me? I'm dating someone new, someone kind and honest who knows my full history and understands my cautious approach to trust. My career continues to flourish. Most importantly, I've reclaimed my capacity for joy, for connection, for hope. Sometimes the best revenge isn't making others suffer for their misdeeds. Sometimes it's refusing to let their actions define your future. Sometimes it's simply living well. As I look at Emma, I see not the product of betrayal but the possibility of redemption for all of us. In her innocent eyes, I glimpse a future where the sins of the past need not determine the shape of what's to come. That, perhaps, is the most unexpected resolution of all. Wow, what a journey this has been, sharing my story with all of you today. I'd love to know if any of you have experienced similar family betrayals or had to find your own path to healing. Did you choose revenge, forgiveness, or something in between? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe to my channel for more real-life stories about family dynamics, betrayal, and the complicated path to healing. Share this video with someone who might need to hear that living well truly is the best response to betrayal. Thank you all for listening, and remember, our past shapes us, but our choices define us. See you in the next video.